Hello guys, welcome back to the Eat Like Ruby podcast and welcome if you are here for the first time. I feel like 2025, first initial weeks of January, is such a good time for people to embark on their health and fitness or nutrition training journey, all of those things. So you might be stumbling across the Eat Like Ruby podcast for the first time. If you are, welcome. I'm stoked to have you here. If you're a long-term listener, thank you so much. I am so stoked to have you here. I'm going to rip straight in today. If you are a little bit behind on episodes or you are new here, we are kind of mixing things up a little bit on the podcast this year, where once a week we're dropping a really educational, on-point episode, like picking a topic, going really hard on that topic, and just shooting straight facts on it. We do a mix of like chatty episodes, guest episodes, and all those things. We're definitely going to keep those this year, which is why we're going to 2 episodes a week, starting this week, which is so exciting. But I do want to have that one solo episode every week. That's just really educational and informative. And so that's what I'm going to do today, solo episode, and it's going to flow on from the last 2 that I've done. So that's what I'm going to do today, and it's going to flow on from the last 2 that we've done. The last 2 episodes were kind of like our first 2 big episodes for 2025. And I thought, what better way to sort of get started, and especially get started with this new, really intentional educational format, than to hit like the foundation and the basics of nutrition, especially the foundation and the basics of fat loss, really explain those things, and then also start to explain how we can implement that, where we tend to go wrong, common things we see come up that go well, don't go well, etc. That's really what we spoke about in the last 2 weeks. So if you haven't listened to those, I would definitely go back and do so probably before this one, because this one is kind of going to be like the 3rd episode in that little mini series, if you will. Those 2 flowed on really well from each other. And then today I'm pretty much going to, what I've done is listen back to those 2. I actually recorded those 2 just before we went on the break for New Year's and Chrissy and stuff. I've listened back to those, and then there's been a few things that's come up where I'm like, oh, we'll explain that further. We'll go into detail with that because we explained that, we want to explain this, etc. And it's kind of just going to flow on from them, kind of wrap up that topic, and I hope really just give you the information, the education, the understanding that you need to get started towards any nutrition goal, but especially a fat loss goal. If you're someone that has a fat loss goal in 2025, I think the last 2 episodes and then this one are so insanely beneficial to help you really set up a successful, enjoyable fat loss phase and truly know what you are doing. The main values in Eat Like Ruby are education, enjoyment, empowerment. I want people to have the education and the facts to know what they're doing. I want you to know how to do that in an enjoyable way. And then I want you to feel empowered because of those things. I know what I'm doing. I actually enjoy doing it. Let's fucking go. I'm empowered as fuck. So listen to those 2. If you've already done that, if you're a regular listener, wherever you're at, that's awesome. I'm going to pick up where I left off today. And like I said, just kind of tie up any loose ends that came up with those episodes and just really wrap up that topic. And just as a little sneak peek FYI, next week we're going to get into a bit of training chat for the new year. I've got 2 awesome training episodes I want to do. So if you're someone who's really into training or I would say next week is going to be the kind of like foundation of training, like what we've just done with nutrition. So if you're someone who's sort of a little bit lost or wondering how much should I train, what should training look like depending on my goal, etc., that's going to be for you. And then the one after that, I want to get a little bit deeper, a little bit more, not advanced, but just like really explain the structure of training. I've got a really juicy episode that's been living rent-free in my head for 6 weeks, I would say. So next week I'm going to come with the foundation of training, and then I'm going to come with that juicy episode the week after. And then I've got plenty more planned, I promise you guys. So just know that that's what's coming. But today we're going to really wrap up that foundational nutrition chat and especially really hone in on the fat loss focus. I said in the last few weeks that this is obviously a really common time of year that people want to pursue fat loss. We obviously speak a lot about fat loss and provide a lot of programs and resources and all the things about fat loss at this time of year. So what I speak about in this episode today is going to be nutrition as a whole, but we're going to hone in a little bit more on how the specific things we talk about would apply to fat loss. So I'm going to jump straight into it. I love how I say I'm going to jump straight into it after I've been talking for probably 10 minutes, but now I'm going to jump into it. So One thing I want to speak about, and we touched on it in some of those episodes, and we've definitely touched on this on the podcast before, but I think if you are a beginner or a newbie, or maybe not even, but I think this little thought or this little question could have come up for some people. In the last few episodes, we really spoke about the deficit and the fact that we need a deficit in place to achieve fat loss. Regardless of the diet that we're doing, regardless of what we're actually eating, we need a calorie deficit in place to achieve fat loss. If you do not understand that, definitely go back and listen to the last 2 episodes first. But we touched on the fact that sometimes people can implement a specific diet like clean eating, intermittent fasting, cutting out carbs, cutting out any sort of food, paleo, keto, anything at all, and still achieve fat loss. And then in their mind, they can sort of have that belief or that thought of, yeah, I understand what you're saying about the deficit, Rubes, and that makes sense, but I also achieved fat loss when I did XYZ diet, anything like I just said. So what I want to speak about here is why those diets can still lead to fat loss. If we think about the fact that we do need the calorie deficit in place to achieve fat loss, if we do something like intermittent fasting, for example, intermittent fasting, if people don't know, is where people usually pick an eating window or a feeding window, they might call it, and then they fast the rest of the time. So a really common thing people can do is eat between 12 p.m. and 6 p.m. or 12 p.m. and 8 p.m. Everyone does this a little bit differently, but really the idea is I eat for a certain amount of time in the day and then I fast for the rest of the time. If we think about that, we could absolutely achieve fat loss doing that because let's say, for example, you ate 4 meals a day normally, and then you switch to intermittent fasting and suddenly that first meal or maybe even those first 2 meals that you normally eat in the day get removed from your diet. By removing 2 big meals, you've removed a big chunk of calories as well, and therefore most likely created a calorie deficit. Not always, and I'm going to speak about that soon, but if we really think about the fact that we need the deficit in place to achieve fat loss, someone drastically changes how many times a day they eat and therefore how much total food and calories they end up consuming for the day, you're very, I don't want to say very easily because it might not, but you're very easily able to fall into a deficit there because you're eating a lot less. And if you think about a deficit, it's where we have less energy coming in than going out. So if you're someone who's done that and then you go, oh, but I really achieved fat loss with intermittent fasting, it'd be because intermittent fasting created the deficit. If we look at any other diet, like clean eating is a great example as well. If we implement a quote clean diet, I've spoken before about why I don't love the term clean diet because there's no real definition of that. It can get a little bit loose, it can get a little bit shitty, and people can often get a bit of a shitty mentality around it. But if we think about someone that is maybe smashing like takeaway and cake, biscuits, chocolate, lollies, all of these things all day every day, and then they switch to a quote clean diet, if by doing that you've removed a huge chunk of your calories, let's just say purely for example, you were having takeaway pizza every single night for 1,500 calories. If it's takeaway deep pan pizza, whatever, it's probably going to be a shit ton of calories. If you were doing shit like that all the time and then you switch to a quote clean diet, and then if we look at a typical dinner of maybe like meat and veg, meat and salad, even a bit of carbs with that, whatever, probably looking at a dinner now that's 400 to 500 calories. So again, you've removed a massive chunk of calories from your day by switching over to that diet. And this is the same thing if we think about people cutting out carbs, cutting out sugar, cutting out fat, cutting out pasta, anything that someone might choose to cut out from their day in an attempt to achieve fat loss. If we were, let's just say again, for an example, let's just say you're eating roughly 2,000 calories a day, and that 2,000 calories included bread, sugar, pasta, any of those things I just said. You then decide to cut those out from your day. You eat the same food you normally would, but if you were having maybe like a salad sandwich for lunch, now you just have the salad, you've removed the sandwich, you've removed the bread. By removing that bread, you've removed 200 calories of food you were eating. Therefore, your day is now 200 calories less. If you do that with carbs as a whole, and you remove the rice from your dinner, and you remove any pasta or bread or any of those similar foods, and they were contributing 400 to 500 calories to your day, by removing the foods, you've removed 400 to 500 calories. Therefore created the calorie deficit. Therefore we start to see fat loss, and then people make that connection or start to form that belief of when I remove carbs, when I remove pasta, when I remove sugar, etc., I achieve fat loss. it wasn't the removal of those exact foods. It was the removal of the calories that were coming from those foods as well. The exact same way we would see the deficit get created if we removed all meat from the day, or we removed all veggies from the day, or fruit from the day, or anything at all. If we think about something that's contributing 200, 400, whatever it is, amount of calories to our day, and we remove that food, therefore we remove the calories that are coming from that food. Regardless of what the food was, the calories are gone. So that's where any of those diets can definitely create a successful fat loss plan, and they can lead you to achieve fat loss if you're implementing them, because they're helping to create the deficit. We know the deficit is the thing we need to achieve fat loss. And I'm going to touch on those a little bit more soon, because like I said before, sometimes those sort of diets, or implementing any sort of diet, can give us successful fat loss or weight loss in the way that I just explained. Sometimes they can't, and I'm going to come to that in a second. But one thing we really want to think about here is, if we know that in order to achieve fat loss, we need to have a calorie deficit in place. If we think about someone being on one of those restrictive diets, let's say, and I've said this a million times, guys, I'm going to step in and say it again here. If you're implementing one of those diets and it feels really good, positive, successful for you, you're in good health, it's enjoyable, all those things, I'm not here to judge them. I'm not here to criticize them. I more want to point out how they can work, how they might not work. And if someone feels like they have to implement those things and they don't enjoy them, I want to explain what's going on there so you could maybe feel like you can step away from them. So when I say restrictive diet, I'm not saying it in like a rude, judgy way. It's just that they are quite restrictive when we think about it. But the reason I want to, where I want to go with this is, if someone is implementing a restrictive diet like clean eating, for example, they say, just eating clean, I'm only eating whole foods, whatever they decide that looks like for them. So often people can put something quite strict and rigid in place like that. And then if they find themselves in the position where they stray from it, even with like one biscuit, they can get into that mentality of like, I fucked it up, I've ruined it, everything's gone to shit, I should start again tomorrow, start again next week. Any or all of these things can come up from people from like simply just breaking the rules that they've put in place, even if, like I said, it's literally with one biscuit. And this is where I have a bit of a problem with those diets, because first of all, I'm a big advocate of flexible dieting. I think we want to learn how to include any and all foods in our day, and we want to know how to set up a day of eating that truly works for us and is enjoyable for us. So it's not so much that I'm against other diets, I'm just way more of an advocate for that sort of diet. But if we are in that position where we've put these really strict rules in place and we feel like the second we just step outside of them, like I said, with literally one biscuit, everything's gone to shit. This is where I think it is so important to have the education and the understanding of nutrition and calories, energy, fat loss, all the things I speak about. Because if we think about a person who, let's just say, for example, was implementing a clean eating diet, and that clean eating diet just happened to result in them eating 1,600 calories a day, and that was a deficit for them, right? Even if they're not tracking it and they've got no idea about calories, they're implementing a certain way of eating. That way of eating could be adding up to 1,600 calories. In our example, it is. If that person then is like, I'm going to have one biscuit, and then their day becomes 1,650, maybe 1,700 calories, whatever the biscuit was worth. If we understand nutrition and calories and all of these things, we can stop for a second and go, okay, I had a really solid day, and I also had one biscuit. It's probably still going to leave me in a deficit. It's definitely not going to pack a ton of weight onto me. It's not going to pull me out of fat loss and start piling weight onto me. I haven't completely ruined my diet, my progress, my results, anything at all. It's literally an additional 50 to 100 calories. It'd be like having an extra apple for the day. But when we don't understand calories and all these things, people can spiral so much from one food like that, where if we do understand those things, we can look at it from that way I just said, where we go, okay, now I know what this means. My day was an extra 100 calories. Maybe then we might be like, oh, I had the extra 100 calories from the biscuit. I'll scale back my dessert a little bit to still hit the target I want to hit. Or I just add the biscuit to my day and I know that I've had 1,700 calories today instead of 16. When we understand this stuff and we truly understand this stuff, we can logically think about it and just know that it's actually not a big deal at all, and it can definitely continue to work with us and our goals. And B, we can remove that frantic, hectic emotion of like, oh my God, I wrecked everything, because you truly understand that you haven't. And I think that that's so important. And that's one of the biggest things I see with girls who come through Eat Like Ruby and are there for a while and really start to learn and implement this stuff, I don't think anyone's having one biscuit and going like, fuck, I've ruined everything, because you're like, no, I know I haven't. And that's a really cool position to be in. So that's even a cool thing to clock if you're quite experienced and you're in a good place with nutrition and flexible dieting. Have a think about how you would feel right now if you had one extra biscuit. And then if you're someone who's maybe not in a good place with these things, or you are trying to learn and understand this stuff, just think about how you would feel and what your approach would be in that moment, because it's literally one fucking biscuit. It's not going to undo anyone's results or, like I said before, start piling weight onto us. But then so much of the problem that we have when something like this happens is like the thoughts and the emotion and everything that comes with it. And I think the more educated we are, the less we struggle with those things, which I think is really cool. And while we're kind of on that topic of the extra biscuit or having any little extra things, this is definitely something I want to talk about. If you've been in the fat loss phase, you would have heard me talk about this before. You've probably heard me mention it in small ways on the podcast before, but I really want to touch on the way that things can pull us out of a deficit. And this is by far one of the most common things I see with people who are not achieving the results they want, especially when it comes to fat loss. If we start to maybe understand the deficit a little bit, maybe we've calculated our deficit, someone's given us nutrition targets, anything like that, and you start to have a bit of an idea of what amount of food would leave you personally in a deficit and result in fat loss, there's still little things that people can do, and they tend to do quite often, quite regularly. It's very common. If you can relate to anything I'm about to say, you're definitely not alone, but that's why I think it's cool to talk about it. What I want to talk about is, let's just say, for example, I'm going to run with one example where someone's effective calorie deficit is 1,600 calories. And I just want to say, like always, guys, this is not advice. I'm not saying everyone should eat this. This is purely just pulling a number out so we can work with the number as an example to explain shit. Let's say your effective calorie deficit is 1,600 calories. So common for people to plan a day, tick the boxes that they want to tick with protein, fiber, all the things. We spoke about them in the last few weeks, and hit that 1,600 calories. If we do this and we actually follow through on that planned day and we eat all that food on that day, but then we also have a couple of little extra snacks and bites and licks and all of these things, we're no longer eating 1,600 calories. We could be eating 17, 18, 19, 2,000, 3,000, wherever. Like that could take us in any direction. And we don't really know, because it's common to track that day, plan that day, really sort of portion out the things that you have tracked and planned. But then when the snacks come into play, it's just like, oh, that extra little teaspoon or that extra biscuit, etc. And like I said before, that one extra biscuit's not going to make or break anything. But if it's every day, you're no longer on a 1,600 calorie diet. You may be on a 1,700 or an 1,800 calorie diet. If it's a biscuit and spoons of peanut butter out of the jar and an extra second serving of dinner or an extra dessert, etc., your 1,600 calorie day is now probably a 2,000 calorie day. Again, like I just said, if that's every day, we're no longer at all on a 1,600 calorie diet. We're on a 2,000 calorie diet, which might not be a bad thing. But if we think about this example where the person knows their effective deficit is 1,600, and if the goal is fat loss, we don't really then want to be eating 2,200, because we know that's not our effective deficit and it's not going to work towards our goal. So like always, there's no right or wrong, but it's super important to just understand, if I'm planning and tracking a day on XYZ amount, but then I'm also having a lot of extra things in the form of snacks, second servings, bites, licks, etc., I'm not really eating that amount that I'm planning. The other thing that can kind of intercept and cock block the results when we've got the deficit in place is big weekends, big meals out, big nights out, anything like that. First of all, like I said before, I'm the biggest advocate of flexible dieting. If you've been in Eat Like Ruby, you'll know I specifically teach a lesson on enjoying meals out. I think it's one of the most important things to learn if we really want to get set up with lifelong, sustainable, enjoyable nutrition. Absolutely think we can enjoy meals out. But we cannot confuse enjoying meals out with needing to eat a certain amount to achieve a fat loss goal. And they can work together at times. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. That's a whole nother topic. But what I'm talking about is, again, with our example, if we know that we need to have 1,600 calorie days to achieve fat loss, if we go out 4 nights a week, and like I said before, maybe we have a takeaway pizza that's worth 1,500 calories. If you've eaten food all day, 1,600 calories worth of it, and you go out for a pizza that's 1,500 calories, well, now you're on a 3,000 calorie day. Again, not a wrong thing, not a bad thing, but not an effective fat loss thing if we know that effective fat loss happens on 1,600 in this example. So this is where I think nutrition education and understanding is key, because You want to be able to make informed decisions at these times. I speak about this so much in Eat Like Ruby. There are absolutely times that you can make an informed decision to say, I'm going out and eating a whole pizza. That's awesome. I love that. Go off. But we need to actually understand nutrition and what's going on there, what's required for our goals, etc. We then need to make informed choices, be aware, understanding, accepting of those choices. And I think this is the mindset work that has to happen with the education work. And this is why I love Eat Like Ruby and I've built it the way I have, because I think it's so important to give the education and facts on nutrition and then go, okay, but I am a real life human being that does want to go out for dinner, does want to eat pizza every now and then, etc. How do I manage my mindset and my thoughts and everything around that to actually do it in controlled ways, aware ways, positive ways? We don't want to be oblivious to nutrition and just be in that mindset of like, I need to eat a really restrictive diet, or if I do want to go out for dinner, everything's fucked. There's so much room in the middle ground. I feel like I've gotten so off topic, by the way, but I'm going to bring it back. But there is so much room in the middle ground here. But if I bring it back to the actual topic and how this can cockblock fat loss progress, if we are tracking at or planning days and tracking at the amount that we need to achieve fat loss, but then we're having multiple big meals out, nights out, weekends, etc. If we think about needing to have an effective calorie deficit in place to achieve fat loss, think about the total calories that have come in across the week. If we do hit the required intake that we need to, in that example, 1,600, maybe 3 or 4 days a week, but then we have 3 or 4 days that will well up in the 2,000s, maybe even hitting 3,000. If we step back and look at the average intake for the week, it's well above 1,600. So that's just where it's really important to understand, like, okay, if I know what's required to achieve my goal, but then I step back and think I'm not actually doing that very often, this is where obviously that can become a problem if we do want to progress towards that goal. The last little thing I see that can be really common when we want the fat loss progress and we're trying to work towards it is people not truly understanding everything I've just spoken about in the last 3 weeks and getting into that mentality of just being like, I need to eat good, I need to eat well, I need to eat healthy. If we think about the fact that we need the calorie deficit in place, I feel like I've said that 8 times in this episode, but if we think about the fact that we need that in place to achieve fat loss, but then if we go into the week or the month with a plan of just, I'm going to quote, eat good, eat well, eat healthy. First of all, I hate the term eat good because eating good can be going out and enjoying pizza. Eating good can be implementing a really strict diet. What's quote good can look different for different people, different goals, different times. So I hate that term, like I'm eating good. But so many people do just go into the week with that. And I don't want to shame or fault those people because you don't know what you don't know. And if you think that that's what you need to do to move in the direction you want to go, it absolutely makes sense that that's the approach you're taking. But if we do go in with that approach, when we think about eating good or eating well, we could still overeat. We could still have portions that are really big. Some, quote, healthy foods can still be quite high in calories. So that can absolutely add up enough to pull us out of a deficit. And that can be a huge disconnect. And it can honestly be a huge mindfuck because if you think about a person who is really well-intentioned and trying to work towards something they want to achieve, going into the week going, I'm going to eat really good, actually putting a lot of effort into doing that, getting to the end of the week, the end of the next week, etc., and just going, I'm not fucking getting anywhere. This is why. If we don't truly understand the amount of food that needs to come in to leave us in an effective deficit, we can eat as well, good, healthy as we want. We're not going to see progress towards that because we don't have it in place. And if you don't understand that, definitely go back and listen to the last 2 episodes because I really broke that down. And I think this will just tie that up perfectly to really understand that we can't just focus on, quote, eating healthy or eating good. If we do want to progress towards a body composition goal, we can absolutely include healthy foods. In last week's episode, we spoke about all the things we want to include in our day to really set up a good quality day of eating. And I'm just going to touch on that for a second because that can get confusing for people if they're like, you said don't eat good, now you're saying good quality, etc. If we think about good quality foods, this is how I like to think of it, and this is how I like to teach it in Eat Like Ruby. In terms of good quality foods, we're looking at things like fruit and veg. Absolute no-brainer. We want to eat enough fruit and veg. We want things like whole grains alongside those fruit and veg because the combo of those 3 things is going to give us a really decent amount of fiber. Fiber is super beneficial for gut health and movement in the gut, digestion, keeping us nice and regular. I'm not going to get into too much detail there, but if you want nice, smooth flowing digestive system, we want to get enough fiber. Fruit, veg, whole grains, absolutely part of that. If you think about protein, protein's a no-brainer. I spoke about that last week. That's a really good quality food to include in our days. Personally, I'm a huge fan of calcium. I think especially as women, we want to focus on like bone strength and bone health as we age. So I'm a big advocate of getting enough calcium. Dietary fat can be another thing we want to get enough of because there's a lot of important roles that it plays in the body. So there's a lot of good quality foods that we want to include in our day. Make sure we get enough of them. Make sure we're regularly eating them to support all those other things. If we think about things like digestion and bone health, etc., just as examples, like I just said, they're nothing to do with fat loss. They can become intertwined, but we're not getting enough fiber for fat loss. We're getting enough fiber for good digestion and gut health. We're not getting enough calcium for fat loss. We're getting enough calcium for bone strength and bone health. That's really cool. And that's why, like I said, I love to teach this in Eat Like Ruby because I love people to know enough about food quality and focus on food quality nice and consistently to optimize health in other ways. But food quantity and the amount of food that comes in will be the deciding factor on whether we achieve fat loss, weight gain, etc. If we think about those last few episodes where we spoke about the fact that if too much energy comes in, the body's going to store it. Energy, by the way, is calories. Calories are in food. If too much food, calories, energy comes in, the body's going to store it and we're going to start to gain weight. If not enough comes in, the body's going to start to pull out of storage, so we're going to start to lose weight. That's what we need to have at play if there is a weight gain or a fat loss goal. We want to make sure we've got the right amount coming in to promote that process happening. So that's our food quantity. We then want to look at our food quality to support other factors in health, like I said before. And again, we touched on that last week. So I don't want to discourage people from eating healthy foods or eating well or eating good. I want people to know about food quality and definitely work towards that. But I truly want people to know that food quantity is going to be the deciding factor of whether you progress towards a weight gain or fat loss goal. And I think it is so common for people to have those goals that I just said, think that focusing solely on quality, food quality, is going to be the thing that leads them to achieve that. And then, like I said, you put in a lot of effort, you put in a lot of work, and you feel like you're spinning your wheels because you're busting your ass and you're not getting there. It's because we've missed the quantity aspect. And what I was touching on there was that final factor that eating good and eating healthy can still pull us out of the deficit or intercept the deficit, alongside things like the big weekends and the meals out, maybe planning days and then eating extras on top of those days. And if we think about those three things that I just said being really common reasons that can pull people out of a deficit or not have an effective deficit in place, it can even be really common for people to be doing all three. And I used to actually have this in the fat loss phase as like a lesson in the initial weeks, and we used to describe it as the fat loss fuck fight. This is a fat loss fuck fight. If you are wanting to progress towards a fat loss goal and you are doing the combination of those three things, that is absolutely a fat loss fuck fight. There is so much going on there that's going to intercept a successful fat loss phase and therefore not get you a successful fat loss result, because those three things are on their own, they're already going to cock block the fat loss progress. Together, it is a fat loss fuck fight. And that really, if we think about that, if we were planning days, and maybe we're planning to work towards a certain amount, or we're just planning, quote, good days, and then we're having all the little extra snacks on top of that, already we've moved away from the deficit. If we then bring in a big weekend, etc., on top of that, we've come even further away from the deficit. If we're then just like disregarding total intake completely and being like, I just need to eat good, I need to eat well, I've got no idea now if we're in a deficit or not. So hence the fat loss fuck fight. So just important to really understand those things. And like I keep saying, if you don't, I'd tie in the last 3 episodes, go back and listen to those other 2, tie it into this one, and I think that'll really explain it for you. There's a couple more little things I want to touch on here, and that is, like I said before, sometimes people can implement those restrictive diets like we touched on at the start with the fasting or clean eating, cutting out certain foods. And like we mentioned before, they can work because we've removed enough calories by doing that diet to implement a successful deficit. But then I said sometimes they don't work. The reason that they sometimes don't work is pretty much what I just said. If we think about somebody going into a clean eating diet, or even someone cutting out bread, you might go into a clean eating diet that is really good quality food, but you've got no idea about the quantity of food. That quantity could be adding up heaps. You're nowhere near a deficit, so you are eating really good, healthy, well. you're not in a calorie deficit, you're not achieving fat loss. If we think about someone, like I said, cutting out bread, you might cut out bread, which might remove 200 calories for your day. You might remove your sandwich for the day and your 200 calories is gone from the bread. And in place of that sandwich, you might bring in a big loaded salad with cheese, dressing, nuts, all the things, and that might be 500 calories. So again, we've got to really understand that it's not the individual foods that are fucking up fat loss progress. It's the calories from those foods, and we can very easily take one out, bring in something that we think is like better or good, etc. But depending on how those two foods compare in calories, you could have just taken out a certain amount of calories, brought in the same amount, brought in more, brought in less. You don't know. And this is, again, where we need to understand food quantity alongside the quality. So I feel like I had a big note there to go into the fact about those restrictive diets sometimes don't work, but I feel like I've kind of already touched on that. So 2 final things I want to touch on. This one is huge. I see this a lot and I really want to explain this because I think so many people will benefit from hearing this. And it is the quote of, "I wasn't eating enough to lose weight." We mentioned this not last week, but the week before, where eventually if we push to an extremely low enough amount, we are going to achieve fat loss. And I said in that episode, I'm going to say again, I do not advise doing this. We want to find a healthy, moderate deficit to put in place. But the example I used in that episode was, if you found yourself on a deserted island and you literally couldn't eat, do you think you're going to gain weight or lose weight? We're going to lose weight in a situation like that because we're literally fucking not eating. So if we think about then eating a little bit and then eating a little bit more and then eating a little bit more, eventually we eat enough that we stop the weight loss process happening when we're on a deserted island, but also in our everyday life. So really think about that and then bring it back to that comment of, I wasn't eating enough to lose weight. It doesn't really make sense when we think about it, but it can be a common thing for somebody to, let's say they try and stick to a deficit of 1,500 calories, right? Again, just an example. Sometimes people can do that and then they really struggle with like hunger, cravings, maybe low energy. It's just hard to adhere to. They can't be consistent. And then you might find yourself in a position where you're doing a lot of the shit we just spoke about for the last half hour. Maybe you're working towards 1,500 calories. You're planning your days to do that. You're trying to do that. But then you're falling into any of those other patterns we said before. I think the most common one in this scenario is just the extra little snacks and bites, etc. Because if you've planned a day and you're working through that day, but then like I said, hunger, energy, cravings, adherence, etc., you're really struggling with those things, very easy to just grab a little snack, have an extra little bite, have a few spoonfuls of something. So that is so common. And if we think about everything we've just spoken about, what's happening there is we're working towards a 1,500 calorie day, but we're actually consuming maybe 18, 19, if not into the 2,000s because of all the little extras. What can happen there is when a person is, maybe they've calculated their own targets to be 1,500, maybe someone's given them those targets, maybe you've had success on them before. If you're pretty certain that like, I need to work towards 1,500, right? And then you do, and you plan your days and you work towards that and you're very sort of focused on this 1,500 number. It's very easy to, I don't want to say convince yourself in like a rude way, but kind of convince yourself like subconsciously, no, I'm on 1,500 calories a day. But then when we really look at the extras, it's like, no, you're not. And so people can really like convince themselves and form that really strong belief of, I ate 1,500 calories and I didn't achieve fat loss. What can happen there, and I'm going to come back to that in a second, but people can then move to like 1,800, for example, and feel like the hunger, cravings, energy, adherence, everything is way better because you've got more flexibility, you can eat a little bit more, you can adhere to it way better, it's more enjoyable, etc. You find yourself not having the extra snacks or anything because you're actually satisfied enough on that day to stick to it. If we think about those scenarios, when we're aiming for 1,500 but we're having a lot of extras on top of it, like I said, we could be eating well up into the 2,000s. When we aim for 1,800, we hit the 1,800, we don't have any extras, we consume 1,800 calories. Come back to the person that has formed that really strong connection with the 1,500 number because they're so used to thinking about it, working towards it, trying to hit it, etc. It's so prominent in your mind that you are really convinced that I eat 1,500 calories a day. And like I said, you're not lying and you're not like being lazy. You're just so like adamant on that number because you're spending so much time around that number. And then we really do form that belief. I ate 1,500 calories a day. I didn't lose any weight. When I went to 1,800 calories, I started to. And then people can come back to that initial quote I said of, I'm not eating enough to lose weight. If we really think about what's happening there, it's not that you weren't eating enough to lose weight. It's that you were aiming for a low intake, but not hitting that low intake, eating a fuck ton more. When you went to a slightly higher intake, you were eating a little bit more, but not a fuck ton more. And suddenly, again, we've got these beliefs. When I ate 1,500, I didn't lose weight, but when I ate 1,800, I did. Clock the difference of when I worked towards 1,500, I didn't lose weight. When I worked towards 1,800, I did. Because when we worked towards the 1,500, we weren't actually hitting it. So that might apply to you, that might not. I could have just gone super hard on a topic that has no relevance to you whatsoever, but I think it is very, very common. And that exact quote of I wasn't eating enough to lose weight is something I hear so often. If we think about everything we've spoken about in the last few weeks, it actually doesn't make sense. If we think about the fact that we were starving to death on a deserted island, we're not going to gain weight, we're going to lose weight. So again, it doesn't really make sense. And then if we think about what could potentially be happening in that scenario I just explained, that makes a lot of sense. So it's just important to catch that and think, where does that apply to me? Where have I maybe dabbled in those things? And the last thing I'll say on that is you might be able to relate to some of those things I just said. Like you might have aimed for a low intake and then all of that shit. You might have stuck to that sometimes because then people can start to be like, oh, but like when I was on 1,500 or 1,600, like I did adhere to it and I did hit it. And like everything you're saying, Rubes, I get it, but I wasn't doing that. You might not have been doing it every day, but most likely you're doing it enough to just continuously pull you out of that deficit a little bit at different times in different ways to different extents, but enough overall that your average intake wasn't really consistent with that low amount that you think it was. That's all I'm going to say on that. I hope that made sense, but I think that's a really important thing for people to clock. And I just had literally one more note. Like I said, I listened to those last two episodes and then I thought, oh, there's a few things I want to go into further detail about. At one point in one of those episodes, I made a comment about how many meals we eat in a day. One thing I just think is important to touch on, because I don't feel like we've ever really spoken about this, is the amount of meals or the meal timing isn't important. I don't know if this is still common, but it used to be common for people to be like, eat small meals to boost your metabolism. I'm not even getting into that. We're not doing that, guys. If we think about a deficit, there's a certain amount coming in, there's a certain amount going out. We want to find that position we can be in where there's less coming in than going out. Obviously, if we've got a weight gain goal, it is the opposite. We know all this. But the reason I'm saying this is because the amount of meals doesn't matter. The timing of those meals doesn't matter. Essentially, we're wanting to get to the end of the feeding window and be like, okay, this much came in, this much went out. And then, like I've said before, we then step back and look at the average of those things as well. So it doesn't have to be day to day, but overall, what we need to have in place to achieve fat loss or weight gain is that energy balance, more coming in, less going out, etc., depending on the goal. The body's not clocking, oh, but that one came in at 6 a.m. and that meal came in at 8 p.m., etc., etc. It's in that cycle of how much is coming in, how much is going out. Am I storing excess food that's coming in, or am I using excess food that's been stored because there's not enough coming in? Regardless of what time it's come in, etc. So I think that's just important to know and to think about, because I think one of the key things with flexible dieting as well is really setting up your day in a way that suits you. If you're someone who loves a big brekkie and you know that you go into work and you don't really get the chance to stop and have a snack or have a big lunch or whatever, you can plan your day for that. Going to eat a huge brekkie, going to eat little things on the go during the day, then I'll have a normal dinner. Maybe you're someone that doesn't feel that hungry in the morning, you don't like to eat. The whole fucking breakfast is the most important meal of the day. It can be for some people and it can be fucking shit for others. And this is why I love to say there is no right or wrong. It's not right to say breakfast is the most important meal of the day. What if you do night shift? What if you do different shift? What if you wake up and everyone slept in and your kids are fucking late for school? You need to be able to adjust and pivot and go, what works for me? You don't have to eat breakfast. You don't have to eat at certain times of the day. You want to be able to, design your diet and days of eating to truly suit you, your lifestyle, and your preferences. And you want to have the knowledge and the skill to be able to pivot on that if you do sleep in, if you do get held back at work, anything like that. I'm getting off topic, but if we come back to the meal timing, no meal has to be the most important meal of the day, or definitely eaten at this time, or definitely finished before this time, or anything. You want to be able to line them up to suit you so that you can implement then the food quality and the food quantity that we've just spoken about in the most enjoyable way that then you're likely to stick to it. And let me just break that down before I wrap up. If we think about someone going, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and you hate breakfast, and then you start planning your days and going, no, but I should eat breakfast because everyone's telling me I should eat it, and then you're trying to do that and you simply just don't enjoy it, or it doesn't work for your schedule, so much so that you don't stick to it. Is that really the best diet? Is that really the most important meal of the day? Because you're not even fucking sticking to it. We want to be able to set up the best diet and the most important meals of the day to suit us. You want to be able to look and say, how can I plan my days? When does it suit me to have big meals, small meals? What meals do I want to prepare? What meals do I eat on the go? Any or all of these things are going to be a factor in you planning the best day to suit you. And when we do that, we increase our likeliness of enjoying the day and having it actually work for us. If we increase the likeliness of enjoyment and having it work for us, we increase the likeliness of sustainability, consistency, adherence. If we increase those things, we actually find ourselves implementing the thing we need to implement long enough to achieve the result we want. If we've planned a day that leaves us in a deficit and we have a fat loss goal, and we've optimized enjoyment, adherence, sustainability, and consistency, we're a lot more likely to actually implement that day, therefore stay in that deficit for a long enough time to have it be effective. So don't get caught up in how often should I eat, what time should I eat, etc. You really want to have a look at what suits you in terms of timing, meal size, meal prep, etc. And then work out, okay, how do I make that work with the food quantity that I need to be consuming for the goal that I have, if you have a body composition goal like that. And then how do I include good quality foods as part of that day as well? We spoke about that heaps last week if you need more info on that. And then we step back and we go, okay, I've got the right amount of food coming in to achieve my goal. I've got good quality food coming in to support health. I've designed it myself, so it's actually going to work for me. When I've done that, I've included things that I enjoy. I've made it work for my schedule, my lifestyle, my preferences, etc. The combo of all those things is what we need to have in place to actually then consistently implement a diet that's going to move us in the direction that we want to go. I think this is the perfect place to wrap up these 3 nutrition episodes. This is the final one. I hope you guys got something out of this. Like I keep saying, we're going to be back with educational episodes every week. Like I mentioned before, we're going to jump into some training chat next week. And then I've got some different topics, some cool shit. We are going to take the podcast in a few different directions this year with lots of education and facts and knowledge and all the things. But I really wanted to lay that foundation of nutrition, and especially nutrition for fat loss, to rip into the year. And then just know that we're going to get into the muscle game. We're going to get into performance. We're going to get into, like I said, a few specialty topics. Stay tuned. Watch this space. Please rate and review the Eat Like Ruby podcast. And please take a screenshot of yourself. If you're walking, training, cooking, driving, whatever you're doing, maybe don't take a screenshot if you're driving, but whatever you're doing, take the screenshot, take a photo, chuck the Eat Like Ruby podcast on it, chuck it on your Instagram story, tag Eat Like Ruby. I love seeing them. I love resharing them, and it helps me so much to get the podcast out to more people. Guys, I actually don't know if we've mentioned this because this is my first recording of 2025, but I bought the podcast studio because I'm obsessed with podcasting and I want to keep it going and be able to provide as much education and information as I can. I'm just envisioning me like jumping on the mic every day. So my team who are editing this probably hate hearing that. But honestly, guys, I bought the studio because I was like, I just want to keep giving as much nutrition and training and mindset education as I possibly can. So help me do that by sharing the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I will be back sooner than next week. The second episode is coming.